Eleanor Spencer glided through the manicured gardens of Central Park's most exclusive section, reserved for New York's elite. The soft rustle of her designer dress against the spring grass was the only sound accompanying her that afternoon. As heiress to one of Manhattan's oldest real estate empires, she had grown accustomed to solitude even in crowded spaces. People admired her from a distance, but rarely approached. The tranquil atmosphere shattered when she heard sobbing coming from behind a carefully trimmed hedge. Eleanor paused, tilting her head to listen. Most of the park's wealthy patrons would have continued walking, pretending not to notice. But something about the desperate sound pulled at her, awakening an instinct she didn't know she possessed. Following the sound, she discovered a small boy huddled on a bench, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't have been older than 6, dressed in worn jeans and a faded blue t-shirt that stood out conspicuously among the tailored outfits of the park's usual visitors. "Are you lost?" Eleanor asked, approaching cautiously. The boy looked up, eyes wide with fear and relief at finally being noticed. "I can't find my mum," he managed between hiccuping sobs. "She was here, and then she wasn't." Eleanor glanced around. No frantic parent seemed to be searching the vicinity. She knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level despite knowing her expensive dress would likely be ruined. "My name is Eleanor. What's yours?" "Lucas," he whispered, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Well, Lucas, how about we find someone who can help locate your mum?" She offered her hand, surprised when he took it without hesitation. As she led him toward the park security office, Eleanor noticed the curious glances from acquaintances who recognized her. Eleanor Spencer, childless at 35 after multiple miscarriages, married to Robert Spencer, whose family controlled half of Manhattan's skyline, holding hands with a disheveled child who clearly didn't belong in their world. The security guard seemed unimpressed when they arrived. "We'll call social services," he said dismissively. "They'll place him somewhere until his parents are found." "Somewhere?" Eleanor repeated, feeling Lucas's hand tighten around hers. "A temporary shelter, probably. Standard procedure." Lucas began trembling beside her, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The thought of this child spending the night in some impersonal facility among strangers made her chest tighten. "That won't be necessary," she heard herself saying. "He'll stay with me until his parents are located." The guard raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, there are protocols." "I'm aware of protocols," Eleanor interrupted, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she'd inherited from generations of Spencers before her. "I'll leave my contact information. My husband's law firm can handle any paperwork." She wasn't entirely sure if what she was proposing was legal, but her family name carried enough weight that the guard eventually nodded, albeit reluctantly. "I'll need to file a report, and you'll have to sign some forms," he conceded. Later, as her chauffeur drove them through Manhattan's exclusive Upper East Side, Eleanor studied Lucas's awestruck expression as he pressed his face against the window of her Bentley. "Is this your car?" he asked, his earlier tears forgotten in the face of such luxury. "It belongs to my family," Eleanor replied, already wondering how to explain her impulsive decision to Robert. Her husband was a calculating businessman who measured every action against potential consequences. Bringing home a strange child would seem reckless to him. The Spencer mansion loomed ahead, a stately limestone building that had housed generations of the family. As they approached, Eleanor's phone rang. Robert's name flashed on the screen. "Eleanor, where are you? The Andersons will be here in an hour for dinner." His clipped tone revealed his annoyance. "I'm almost home," she replied, "but there's been a development." She explained the situation as succinctly as possible, bracing herself for his reaction. "You did what?" Robert's voice rose with each word. "Have you lost your mind? You can't just bring a random child home. There are legal implications, security concerns." "He's not a security concern, Robert. He's a lost little boy." "This isn't one of your charity projects, Eleanor. Send him to the proper authorities." Eleanor looked at Lucas, who was now dozing off against the leather seat, exhaustion from his ordeal finally catching up to him. "I'll see you at home," she said firmly, and ended the call. When they arrived, Robert was waiting in the grand foyer, his tall frame rigid with tension. At 42, he commanded respect in every room he entered, not just because of his wealth, but because of the intensity that radiated from him. His eyes, usually calculated and controlled, now flashed with anger. "This is Lucas," Eleanor said simply, guiding the now awake and intimidated boy forward. Robert examined the child with a detached gaze. "Eleanor, we need to talk, privately." In Robert's study, surrounded by first-edition books and priceless art, the argument unfolded exactly as Eleanor had anticipated. "You had no right to make this decision without consulting me," Robert hissed, keeping his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond the heavy oak doors. "There wasn't time to consult you. He needed immediate help, and countless social workers are employed to provide exactly that." Eleanor crossed her arms. "You mean the overworked, underpaid social workers handling dozens of cases? The ones who would have placed him in an overcrowded facility? That's not our problem," Robert insisted. "It became my problem the moment I found him." Robert paced the length of his study. "This isn't just about your savior complex, Eleanor. Have you considered the legal ramifications? What if his parents accuse us of kidnapping? What if—" "His mother is missing," Eleanor interrupted. "No. One was looking for him, Robert. No one." Something flickered across Robert's face, a shadow of an emotion Eleanor couldn't quite identify. For a moment, he seemed to be somewhere else entirely. "One night," he finally conceded. "He can stay one night while the authorities locate his family. Tomorrow this gets handled properly." Eleanor nodded, knowing this small victory was all she could hope for tonight. As she turned to leave, Robert stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm, surprising after the tension between them. "I know why you're doing this," he said quietly, "but bringing home a stray child won't heal what we've lost." Eleanor pulled away, his words cutting deeper than he knew. "This isn't about us. It's about him." When she returned to the main hall, she found Lucas examining a crystal vase with curious fingers. "Are you hungry?" she asked. He nodded eagerly, and she led him toward the kitchen past the dining room where the table was already set for the evening's abandoned dinner party. "Is that man angry?" Lucas asked as they walked. Eleanor considered how to respond. "He's worried," she finally said. "Grown-ups worry about different things than children do. Is he going to make me leave?" Eleanor squeezed his small hand. "Not tonight. Tonight you're safe here with us." As she helped Lucas wash his hands at the kitchen sink, Eleanor felt a strange sense of rightness she hadn't experienced in years. There was something about his presence that filled a void she'd been carrying for too long, a void created by multiple hopes that had ended in heartbreak, leaving her arms persistently empty. She knew Robert was correct about one thing. This child wasn't a replacement for what they had lost. But as Lucas smiled up at her, chocolate smeared on his face from the cookies the chef had given him, Eleanor wondered if perhaps he was something else entirely, an unexpected chance to finally become the mother she had always wanted to be. The door. Spencer Mansion had stood on Fifth Avenue for over a century, its halls filled with whispers of old money and power. Yet in the week since Lucas's arrival, those same halls had been transformed by the sound of childish laughter, a sound foreign to the stately home. Eleanor watched from the doorway as Lucas explored the music room, his small fingers dancing across the keys of the grand piano that had remained untouched for years. The melody he produced was discordant and clumsy, but to Eleanor it sounded like life returning to the mausoleum her home had become. "He needs to go, Eleanor," Robert's voice came from behind her. "It's been a week. This wasn't the agreement." Eleanor turned to face her husband. In the 7 days since Lucas had arrived, the police had filed a missing persons report for his mother, Maria Torres, a single parent who had recently lost her job as a hotel housekeeper. The investigation had revealed that she had no family in New York, having immigrated from New Mexico 5 years earlier. "The authorities are still searching for his mother," Eleanor replied. "Where would he go in the meantime?" "Foster care. Exists for exactly this purpose. He's happy here." Robert's jaw tightened. This isn't about happiness, it's about doing things properly. Properly, Eleanor felt her temper rising. Like having the proper bloodline, the proper background, the proper connections? Is that what matters to you? Don't twist my words, Robert warned. You know that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Before Robert could answer, Lucas's voice interrupted them. Miss Eleanor, look what I found. He came running toward them, clutching a leather-bound photo album. Eleanor recognized it immediately, the album containing photos from her childhood, including pictures of her own mother, who had passed away when Eleanor was 10. Where did you find this? She asked gently, kneeling beside him. On the big shelf. Lucas pointed back toward the library. Who's that lady with you? She looks nice. Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. That's my mother. She was very nice. Where is she now? Eleanor hesitated, glancing up at Robert, whose expression had softened slightly. She's not here anymore, she replied carefully. Lucas nodded with the solemn understanding that only children who have experienced loss can possess. Like my mom might not come back. The innocent question hung in the air between them. Robert's eyes met Eleanor's, and for a moment the shared pain of what they'd both lost connected them across the chasm that had been widening between them for years. Why don't we go make some lunch? Eleanor suggested, deflecting the question. She wasn't ready to answer. As Lucas ran ahead toward the kitchen, Robert placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. I have meetings all afternoon. We'll discuss this later. Eleanor nodded, watching him leave. Despite his resistance, she'd noticed subtle changes in Robert over the past week. He'd started coming home earlier. Sometimes she caught him watching Lucas from a distance with an expression she couldn't quite read. In the kitchen, Eleanor helped Lucas make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, something the Spencer household's private chef had never been asked to prepare before. As they worked, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Detective Harrison, who had been assigned to Lucas's case. Mrs. Spencer, we have new information about Maria Torres, he said when she answered. Eleanor's heart raced. Have you found her? Not exactly. We've discovered she had been ill for some time. Hospital records show advanced stage cancer. She missed her last 3 appointments. Eleanor closed her eyes, turning away from Lucas, who was happily arranging banana slices on his sandwich. I see. There's more, the detective continued. We located a distant relative in Arizona, an elderly aunt named Rosa Martinez. She's willing to take the boy, but she's in poor health herself. She mentioned that Maria had been looking for Lucas's biological father before she disappeared. Did she find him? Unknown, but Ms. Martinez provided a name, Jason Miller. We're looking into it. After hanging up, Eleanor sat at the kitchen island watching Lucas eat his creation with messy enthusiasm. The thought of him being taken away, sent to an elderly relative he didn't know or a father who might not want him, made her stomach clench. That evening, Eleanor found Robert in his study, reviewing documents with his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He looked up when she entered, immediately setting aside his work, a rare gesture that illustrated how much their relationship had shifted in recent days. The detective called, she said without preamble. Lucas's mother is very ill, cancer. They think she may have... Eleanor couldn't bring herself to say the words, not yet. There's an elderly aunt in Arizona who might take him, but she's in poor health. And they're searching for his biological father. Robert was silent for a long moment. I see. He has nowhere to go, Robert. Eleanor. No. Listen to me. For once, really listen. She crossed the room, sitting across from him. I know what you see when you look at Lucas. You see complication, risk, disruption to our carefully ordered lives. But do you know what I see? I see hope. I see a chance to fill this enormous house with something more meaningful than antiques and silence. Robert removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. A child needs a home. We have one. And what happens when they find his father? Or when his aunt decides she wants custody? Have you considered how attached you're becoming? How devastated you'll be when he leaves? Eleanor leaned forward. Is that what this is about? You're trying to protect me from getting hurt again? Robert's silence was confirmation enough. I can't keep living in fear of loss, Eleanor said softly. Neither can you. Later that night, Eleanor was awakened by a small voice at her bedroom door. Lucas stood there in borrowed pajamas that were slightly too large, clutching a worn stuffed bear he'd brought with him. I had a bad dream, he whispered. Eleanor slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Robert. Come on, she whispered back, leading Lucas down the hall to the guest room where he'd been staying. As she tucked him back into bed, Lucas asked, Can you tell me a story? Eleanor smiled. What kind of story would you like? One with a happy ending. She began a tale about a lost prince who found a new kingdom, making it up as she went along. By the time she finished, Lucas was drifting back to sleep. Miss Eleanor? He murmured drowsily. Yes? If my mum doesn't come back, can I stay with you? The question pierced Eleanor's heart. We'll figure something out, she promised, brushing his hair from his forehead. Try to sleep now. She remained by his side until his breathing deepened, then quietly made her way back to her own room. To her surprise, Robert was awake, sitting up in bed. He had a nightmare, she explained, slipping back under the covers. Robert nodded. After a moment, he said, I heard what he asked you. Eleanor tensed, preparing for another argument. Instead, Robert surprised her. I was 12 when my brother died, he said quietly, staring at the ceiling. It was sudden, an accident at our summer home in the Hamptons. My parents never spoke of him again. His room was locked, his photos removed. It was as if he had never existed. Eleanor reached for his hand in the darkness. In 15 years of marriage, he had rarely spoken of his brother. My father told me that Spencers don't dwell on loss, Robert continued. They move forward, they survive, so that's what I did. I survived, but I never really lived, not fully. Robert. When I look at Lucas, he interrupted, I see everything I've spent my life avoiding. Attachment, vulnerability, the possibility of devastating loss. But I also see something else. He turned to face her. I see you coming back. To life. Eleanor felt tears prickling behind her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time I stop just surviving too. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Robert's side of the bed empty. Wrapping herself in a robe, she followed, the sound of voices to the kitchen. There she found a scene so unexpected, it momentarily took her breath away. Robert, still in his pajamas, was making pancakes with Lucas. The kitchen was a disaster. Flour dusted every surface, eggshells littered the counter, and batter dripped onto the imported Italian tile floor. Lucas stood on a stool beside Robert, his face furrowed in concentration as he carefully poured blueberries into a misshapen pancake. You have to wait until the bubbles form before you flip it, Robert was explaining with surprising patience. See those little bubbles around the edge? That's how you know it's ready. Neither of them had noticed Eleanor yet. She leaned against the doorframe, not wanting to interrupt the moment. Robert Spencer, who had board meetings catered by Michelin-starred chefs who had never so much as poured his own coffee in this kitchen, was teaching a child how to make pancakes. It was Lucas who spotted her first. Miss Eleanor, Mr. Robert is teaching me how to cook. Robert looked up, a smudge of flour on his cheek. Instead of the embarrassment or discomfort she expected to see on his face, there was something lighter, almost youthful. I hope you're hungry, he said. We may have made enough pancakes to feed the entire block. Eleanor joined them. Accepting the misshapen blueberry pancake, Lucas proudly served her. As they ate together at the kitchen island, rather than the formal dining room, Eleanor realized that in just 1 week, Lucas had accomplished what years of therapy and pleading had failed to do. He had begun to thaw the frozen grief that had kept Robert isolated for so long. Outside the kitchen windows, Manhattan was awakening to another day of ambition and commerce. But inside the Spencer mansion, something far more valuable was stirring to life. The hesitant first moments of what might become a family. 3 weeks after Lucas arrived at the Spencer mansion, life had fallen into a rhythm that none of them had anticipated. Eleanor had hired a tutor to help Lucas keep up with his education while his situation remained unresolved. Robert, to everyone's surprise, had started coming home early enough to join them for dinner most evenings. The formal dining room, with its imposing mahogany table that could seat 20, had been abandoned in favor of the smaller breakfast nook overlooking the garden. On this particular evening, Eleanor was helping Lucas with a science project when Robert arrived home, loosening his tie as he entered. "How's the volcano coming along?" he asked, examining the papier-mâché creation sprawled across the table. "Mr. Robert, we need red food coloring for the lava," Lucas exclaimed, jumping up from his chair. The ease with which he now addressed Robert marked a significant change from the cautious formality of their early interactions. "I believe that can be arranged," Robert replied, sending a private smile toward Eleanor. "Perhaps we could test it outside this weekend." "Can we invite Jake to see it?" Lucas asked eagerly. Jake was the son of the Spencers' head of security, a boy close to Lucas's age, whom he had befriended during supervised outings in the private garden. The friendship had been another unexpected development, one that Eleanor quietly encouraged, recognizing Lucas's need for companionship beyond two adults. "I don't see why not," Eleanor answered, watching Robert's face for any sign of disapproval. To her relief, he nodded in agreement. Later that night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Eleanor found Robert in his study reviewing documents from their lawyer. She knew what they contained: preliminary paperwork exploring the possibility of temporary guardianship. "Harrison called today," she said, closing the door behind her. "They located Jason Miller." Robert set down the papers. "And?" "He's in Chicago. Apparently he never knew about Lucas. Maria never told him she was pregnant before they broke up. He's coming to New York next week to meet Lucas and discuss options." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. What had begun as a temporary arrangement now faced its first real threat of ending. "What kind of man is he?" Robert asked, his voice carefully neutral. "The detective says he's a high school English teacher. Stable job, no criminal record." He seemed shocked by the news, but immediately expressed interest in meeting his son. Robert was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "That's good. If he's Lucas's father, he has a right to know him." Eleanor studied her husband. "Is that really how you feel?" Robert sighed, removing his reading glasses. "How I feel is irrelevant. There are legal realities we can't ignore. Since when have legal realities ever stopped Robert Spencer from getting what he wants?" Eleanor challenged, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "This isn't a business deal, Eleanor. This is a child's life." He paused, then added more gently, "and his father's rights." Eleanor sank into the leather chair across from him. I know that legally and even morally, his father should have a chance to raise him. But Robert," her voice caught, "I don't know if I can let him go." Robert crossed the room, kneeling beside her chair in an uncharacteristic gesture. "We don't have to make any decisions tonight. Let's meet this Jason Miller first. See what kind of person he is, what kind of father he might be." The following week brought another development, one that further complicated their situation. Lucas's elderly aunt, Rosa Martinez, arrived in New York unexpectedly. At 78, she had made the journey from Arizona despite her frail health, determined to see her great-nephew. Eleanor welcomed her into their home with genuine warmth, though anxiety churned beneath her polite smile. Rosa was a diminutive woman with intelligent eyes that missed nothing as she took in the opulence of the Spencer mansion. "My niece worked here in places like this," she remarked in accented English as Eleanor led her through the main hall. "But she never lived in one." There was no judgment in her tone, merely observation, but Eleanor felt a twinge of discomfort. The disparity between Lucas's previous life and his current surroundings had never been more apparent. Their conversation in the drawing room was cordial but strained. Rosa spoke of Maria with obvious affection, describing her niece's determination to provide a better life for her son after moving to New York. She confirmed what the detectives had told them. Maria had been diagnosed with aggressive cancer over a year ago. She didn't want Lucas to see her suffer, Rosa explained quietly. In our last phone call, she said she was looking for Lucas's father. She wanted to make arrangements for after. Did she find him? Eleanor asked. Rosa shook her head. I don't know. Then I stopped hearing from her. When weeks passed with no word, I called the police. She looked down at her weathered hands. I'm too old to raise a child properly. My health is not good, but he is family. When Lucas returned from his tutoring session and saw Rosa, his reaction was one of polite curiosity rather than recognition. Although Maria had spoken of her aunt, Lucas had been too young during their last visit to remember her clearly. Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she embraced him. You look so much like your mother, she whispered. That evening, after Rosa had retired to the guest suite Eleanor had prepared for her, Robert and Eleanor discussed this new complication in hushed tones. She can't take him, Eleanor insisted. By her own admission, she's not well enough to care for a child. But she's his family, Robert reminded her. His blood relative. And what are we then? Eleanor challenged. Haven't we become something to him too? The question remained unanswered as their attention was diverted by a notification from their security system. Someone was at the gate requesting entry. Jason Miller had arrived in New York a day earlier than expected. Eleanor's heart raced as Robert instructed security to let him in. Within minutes, they were greeting a tall, athletic man in his mid-30s with the same warm brown eyes as Lucas. Jason Miller's discomfort was evident as he stood in the lavish foyer, hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jeans. I apologize for coming unannounced, he said. I caught an earlier flight and I couldn't wait. Robert extended his hand. We understand I'm Robert Spencer and this is my wife, Eleanor. Jason shook their hands firmly. Thank you for taking care of my son. The word "my" seemed to hang in the air between them. The detective told me everything you've done for him. It's more than generous. Eleanor found herself scrutinizing every detail about this man who could take Lucas away from them. The worn leather on his boots, the calluses on his hands that suggested he worked with them as well as his mind, the kindness in his expression that reluctantly reminded her of Lucas. Lucas is asleep, she said, finding her voice. But we'd be happy to tell you about him. Would you like some coffee or perhaps something stronger? Over drinks in the library, Jason shared his story. He had dated Maria briefly in Chicago before she moved to New York. Their parting had been amicable, simply two people on different paths. He had never known about the pregnancy. If I had known, he trailed off, staring into his glass, I would have helped. I would have been there. You're here now, Robert said quietly. Jason looked up at them. I want to do right by him. I'm his father. But I also want to do what's best for Lucas. From what the detective told me, he's settled here. He's happy. He is, Eleanor confirmed, hope rising within her. We've grown to care for him very much. I can see that, Jason replied, and I appreciate it more than I can express. But I need to meet him. I need to know my son. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon. Eleanor spent the morning in a state of nervous anticipation, helping Lucas select an outfit and trying to explain in age-appropriate terms why a man he had never met was coming to see him. Is he nice? Lucas asked, his small face serious. He seems very nice, Eleanor assured him, straightening his collar, and he's very excited to meet you. Why? Eleanor hesitated. Because he's someone who cares about you. Lucas accepted this explanation with the trusting nature of childhood, but Eleanor felt the weight of the partial truth. She and Robert had agreed to let Jason decide how much to reveal about his identity during this first meeting. When Jason arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. Rosa had joined them, her presence adding another layer of complexity to the situation. Lucas stood between Eleanor and Robert, suddenly shy in a way he hadn't been since his first days with them. Jason knelt to Lucas's level, his voice gentle. Hi, Lucas, I'm Jason. It's really good to meet you. Lucas looked up at Eleanor for reassurance before responding. Hello? I heard you're building a volcano, Jason continued, clearly having prepared for this moment. "I used to love science. Projects when I was your age." Lucas's interest was piqued. "Mine's going to have real lava. Well, not real lava, but it looks real." "That sounds awesome. I'd love to see it sometime, if that's okay with you." The interaction continued, cautious but increasingly warm, as Lucas gradually emerged from his shell. Eleanor watched them together, noting the similar gestures, the matching dimples when they smiled. It was like watching a reflection across time. Later, when Lucas went with Rosa to show her his volcano, the three adults faced each other in a moment of reckoning. "He's amazing," Jason said, emotion thick in his voice. "Maria did an incredible job with him." "Yes, she did," Eleanor agreed softly. "I need to be honest with both of you," Jason continued, running a hand through his hair. "I came here fully intending to take my son home with me. It's my responsibility, my right as his father. But seeing him here, seeing how settled he is..." He paused, conflict evident on his face. "I don't want to uproot him again after everything he's been through." Hope flared in Eleanor's chest, but Robert's expression remained guarded. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know yet," Jason admitted. "I want to spend more time with him. Before making any decisions, get to know him, let him get to know me." He looked directly at them. "Would you be open to that? To me staying in New York for a while, visiting Lucas here, while we figure out the best arrangement?" Eleanor looked to Robert, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We would," she replied. "We want what's best for Lucas too." As Jason left that evening, promising to return the next day, Eleanor felt a complicated mix of emotions. The threat of losing Lucas hadn't diminished, but it had shifted. Jason Miller wasn't the unfit father they might have secretly hoped for, nor was he the ruthless adversary determined to tear Lucas away immediately. He was, perhaps most challengingly, a good man who genuinely seemed to want to do right by his son. That night, as they prepared for bed, Robert voiced what Eleanor had been thinking. "We could lose him." "I know. Jason has rights. Legal rights that would almost certainly be upheld in court if it came to that." Eleanor sat on the edge of their bed. "But he seems willing to consider alternatives." "For now," Robert cautioned, "but once he forms a bond, with Lucas, his instinct will be to take his son home. It's what any father would want." The unspoken question hung between them. What would Robert want if he were in Jason's position? Before Eleanor could ask, their bedroom door creaked open, and Lucas appeared in his pajamas. "I can't sleep," he announced, climbing onto their bed without waiting for invitation, a familiarity that would have been unthinkable mere weeks ago. As he settled between them, Robert shared a look with Eleanor over the boy's head. Whatever challenges they faced, whatever complications tomorrow might bring, this moment, this feeling of family, was worth fighting for. Over the next 2 weeks, Jason became a regular presence at the Spencer home. What had begun as awkward, supervised visits gradually evolved into comfortable interactions as Lucas grew more accustomed to this new adult in his life. Eleanor watched their relationship develop, with a complicated mixture of joy and dread. Joy at seeing Lucas's world expand, dread at what it might eventually mean for her own role in his life. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, observing Jason and Lucas playing catch in the garden. Robert approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They look good together," he said quietly. Eleanor nodded, unable to deny the natural ease between father and son. "They do. Harrison called this morning," Robert continued. "They found Maria." Eleanor turned to face him, her heart suddenly racing. "Is she? She's in a hospice facility in Queens. She checked herself in 3 weeks ago when her condition worsened. Apparently, she left Lucas with a neighbor while she went to run an errand, planning to contact social services afterward to arrange care for him. But the neighbor had an emergency of her own and brought Lucas to the park, thinking another friend would meet them there. Somehow Lucas wandered off in the confusion. Does she know he's safe? Robert nodded. Harrison told her. He said she was relieved but very weak. The doctors don't think she has much time left. Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing this news. Does Jason know? Not yet. I thought we should discuss how to handle this before telling him. Eleanor watched Lucas laughing as Jason dramatically missed a catch, falling to the ground in exaggerated defeat. Lucas needs to see his mother, she said firmly, before it's too late. I agree, Robert replied, but there are complications. The hospice has strict policies about young visitors, and Maria's condition. We'll handle the hospice, Eleanor said with the determination that had made her one of New York's most formidable philanthropists. Lucas deserves a chance to say goodbye. The arrangements were made with remarkable speed, thanks to Robert's influence and a substantial donation to the hospice facility. Jason was informed, his face paling at the news of Maria's condition. Rosa, who had extended her stay at Eleanor's insistence, wept quietly when told about her niece. The most difficult conversation, however, was with Lucas. Eleanor, Robert, and Jason agreed that Lucas needed to know the truth about his mother's illness before seeing her. Together, they sat him down in the sunroom, the afternoon light casting a warm glow that belied the gravity of their discussion. Lucas, Eleanor began gently, we have some news about your mother. Lucas's eyes widened. Did they find her? Is she coming to get me? The three adults exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Jason moved closer, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. They did find your mom, he said carefully, but she's very sick, buddy. She's in a special hospital where doctors are taking care of her. Can we go see her? Lucas asked, his voice small but hopeful. Eleanor nodded. Yes, sweetheart, we can go tomorrow, but there's something you need to understand. She took his small hands in hers. Your mother is very, very sick. She might look different than you remember. Because of the medicine? Lucas asked. Yes, Robert interjected, his voice surprisingly gentle. The medicine and the illness have made her very tired. Lucas processed this information with a solemnity beyond his years. Is she going to get better? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truth. It was Jason who finally answered. No, Lucas, the doctors have tried everything they can, but your mom isn't going to get better. His voice cracked slightly. That's why it's so important that we visit her now. Lucas's lower lip trembled. Is that why she left me? Because she was sick? Eleanor pulled him into her arms. Oh, Lucas. She never wanted to leave you. She loves you very much. She just couldn't take care of you anymore because she was too sick. The next day, they made the journey to the hospice facility in Queens, a stark contrast to the luxurious Manhattan world Lucas had been inhabiting. Eleanor had prepared him as best she could, but nothing could fully ready a child for what awaited. Maria Torres lay in a hospital bed, her once vibrant frame now fragile and diminished. When Lucas entered the room, he hesitated, momentarily overwhelmed. Eleanor felt him squeeze her hand tightly, before he whispered, That's really my mom? Yes, sweetheart, Eleanor confirmed gently. Maria's eyes fluttered open at the sound of voices. When she saw Lucas, a weak smile transformed her face. Mi pequeño, she whispered, extending a thin hand toward him. Lucas approached cautiously, studying his mother's face. Whatever doubts he might have had dissolved as he recognized her eyes identical to his own. Mommy, he said, reaching for her hand. The reunion was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Maria managed to stay awake for nearly an hour, listening. As Lucas excitedly told her about the volcano he was building, his new friend Jake, and the enormous house where he was staying. He carefully avoided mentioning how long she had been gone or asking why she had left him, instinctively protecting her from his hurt and confusion. Eleanor, Robert, Jason, and Rosa remained in the background, allowing mother and son this precious time together. Eleanor caught Robert wiping away an unexpected tear when Maria weakly drew Lucas close and whispered something in his ear that made him nod solemnly. As Maria's strength began to wane, a nurse gently suggested that Lucas might like to see the garden while the adults talked. Robert volunteered to take him, leaving Eleanor, Jason, and Rosa with Maria. Once Lucas was out of earshot, Maria turned to them, her voice barely audible. Thank you for taking care of my son." "He's a wonderful boy," Eleanor said, moving closer to the bed. "You've raised him beautifully." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to find his father before I got too sick. I wanted Lucas to have family." "You did find me," Jason said, taking her hand. "Not directly, but I'm here now. I promise you, Maria, I'll take care of our son." Maria nodded weakly, then turned her gaze to Eleanor. "The detective, he told me about you and your husband, about your home." She paused, gathering strength. "Lucas says you make him feel safe." Eleanor couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded. "I need to ask," Maria continued, each word clearly requiring enormous effort, "what will happen to my son?" The question hung in the air, addressing the very conflict that had been building since Jason's arrival. Jason looked at Eleanor, then back at Maria. "I'm his father," he said gently. "Legally, he would come to live with me in Chicago." Maria closed her eyes briefly. "You're a good man, Jason. I remember that about you." She turned toward Eleanor again. "But Lucas, he's been through so much change." "We could work something out," Eleanor suggested, her voice trembling slightly. "An arrangement that's stable for Lucas while allowing Jason to be part of his life." Maria's eyes moved between them, assessing. "My aunt?" she asked, looking toward Rosa. Rosa stepped forward, taking her niece's other hand. "I am too old, mija. Too frail to raise a young boy. But I will always be in his life, I promise you." Maria nodded, closing her eyes as fatigue overtook her. "I need to know it before I go higher that my son will be loved, that he will be safe." "He will," all three promised in near unison. The visit ended when Maria fell asleep mid-conversation, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. As they prepared to leave, the hospice doctor took them aside to explain that Maria's condition was deteriorating rapidly. They would be fortunate, he implied, if she lasted another week. The drive back to Manhattan was subdued. Lucas, emotionally drained from the visit, fell asleep in Eleanor's lap. Jason stared out the window, lost in thought. Robert handled business calls with uncharacteristic impatience, his mind clearly elsewhere. That evening, after Lucas was asleep, the adults gathered in Robert's study. The time had come to address the question that Maria had posed: what would happen to Lucas? "Legally, the situation is clear," Robert began, ever the pragmatist. "Jason is Lucas's biological father. Without a formal adoption in place, he has every right to take custody." Jason sat forward, elbows on his knees. "That's true, and a week ago that's exactly what I planned to do." He looked up at Eleanor and Robert. "But now I've seen how settled Lucas is here. I've seen the life you've given him, the stability, taking him to Chicago, away from everything familiar, right after losing his mother." He trailed off, shaking his head. "What are you suggesting?" Eleanor asked, barely daring to hope. "I don't know yet," Jason admitted. "I want to be part of my son's life. I need to be. But uprooting him now seems cruel." Rosa, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Maria wanted Lucas to be happy, to be loved. Perhaps there is a solution that serves everyone's interests, especially Lucas's." The conversation continued late into the night, exploring options that no one had previously considered. By morning, an unprecedented proposal had taken shape, one that would require sacrifice and compromise from all parties involved, but might just provide Lucas with the stability and love he deserved. 2 days later, Maria Torres passed away peacefully in her sleep. Lucas, who had visited her again the previous afternoon, received the news with solemn understanding beyond his years. "She told me she was going to the stars," he said quietly, when Eleanor explained what had happened. "She said she'd always be watching me from there." The funeral was small but dignified, arranged and paid for by the Spencers. As Lucas placed a single white rose on his mother's casket, he was surrounded by an unlikely family: Eleanor and Robert on one side, Jason and Rosa on the other. 4 adults from vastly different worlds, united by their love for one small boy. In the days that followed, as Lucas processed his grief with the resilience particular to children, the adults finalized their unprecedented arrangement. Jason resigned from his teaching position in Chicago and accepted a job at an elite private school in Manhattan, a position that Robert, as a board member, had helped secure. Rosa agreed to stay in New York, in a comfortable apartment the Spencers purchased in their building, where she could be close to her great-nephew while maintaining her independence. Most surprisingly, Robert converted a wing of the Spencer mansion into a separate residence for Jason, allowing him to live on the property and be an active daily presence in Lucas's life, while respecting the parental role that Eleanor and Robert had begun to establish. The legal documents were complex and groundbreaking, a shared custody arrangement between biological parent and non-biological guardians, with clear provisions for Lucas's education, healthcare, and future. Robert's team of attorneys crafted an agreement that would likely become a case study in family law classes for years to come. As the arrangements took shape, Eleanor found herself in the mansion's library late one night, reviewing the final custody documents. Robert entered quietly, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked, placing 1 glass beside her. Eleanor smiled tiredly, just making sure everything is perfect. Robert took a seat across from her. "It won't be perfect, Eleanor. No family ever is, but I think it might be exactly what Lucas needs." "And what about what you need?" Eleanor asked, studying her husband's face. "This isn't what you signed up for when you married me. Sharing our home with a child who isn't ours, his father, and his elderly aunt." "No," Robert agreed with a soft laugh. "It certainly isn't." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "But perhaps it's what I needed without knowing it." "What do you mean?" "For years I've lived in the shadow of my brother's death. I built walls to protect myself from ever feeling that kind of loss again." He squeezed her hand. "But Lucas found a way through those walls. And now I can't imagine our life without him in it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Even if we have to share him." "Even then," Robert raised his glass in a small toast. "To unconventional families." Eleanor clinked her glass against his. "To unconventional families." That weekend, they held a small gathering to celebrate Lucas's 7th birthday, a celebration that had been planned before their world had changed so dramatically. The garden was transformed with balloons and streamers. A professional magician entertained a small group of children, and a cake in the shape of a volcano took center stage. As Lucas blew out his candles, surrounded by his unlikely family, Eleanor caught Robert's eye across the garden. In that moment, she knew they had created something rare and precious, not the family they had planned, but the family they all needed. 1 year later, the Spencer mansion bore little resemblance to the austere showcase of wealth it had once been. The formal reception rooms remained elegant, but were now punctuated with evidence of a child's presence, a forgotten action figure. On an antique side table, a math worksheet on the Steinway piano, artwork proudly displayed alongside priceless paintings. Eleanor stood in the doorway of Lucas's bedroom, watching as he carefully selected an outfit for his first day of 2nd grade. At 8 years old, he had grown taller and more confident, though the soulful eyes that had first captured her heart remained the same. "What about this one?" he asked, holding up a blue button-down shirt. "Perfect," Eleanor replied. "Very handsome." "Dad said I should look professional for my first day," Lucas explained seriously. Eleanor smiled at his use of the word Dad. In their unique family arrangement, titles had evolved naturally. Jason was Dad, Eleanor was Mom, and Robert had become Papa. Rosa, who visited almost daily from her apartment downstairs, was simply Abuela. The terms had developed organically as their unconventional family found its rhythm. "Well, your dad is right," Eleanor agreed. "But don't forget your lunch is in the blue lunchbox, I know," Lucas finished with a grin. "And Papa already put my new backpack by the door." Eleanor marveled at how seamlessly they had all adapted to their unusual situation. The custody arrangement, that had seemed so radical a year ago, now felt like the most natural thing in the world. Lucas spent weekdays in the main house with Eleanor and Robert, weekends in Jason's wing of the mansion, and regular time with Rosa, who had become the keeper of family stories and traditions. There had been challenges, of course. The society. Pages had buzzed with speculation about the strange living arrangements at the Spencer estate. Old friends had raised eyebrows or whispered behind their hands. Some of Robert's business associates had questioned his judgment, but for every raised eyebrow, there had been unexpected support. The headmistress at Dalton had praised their child-centered approach. Their neighbors, after initial surprise, had welcomed Jason warmly. Even Robert's mother, the formidable Margaret Spencer, had eventually come around after witnessing the positive change in her son and the joy Lucas brought to the family. "Mom," Lucas's voice pulled Eleanor from her thoughts. "Can we have pancakes? Before school, like we did on my first day last year?" "I think that can be arranged," Eleanor replied. "Go see if Papa and Dad are awake yet." As Lucas dashed down the hall, Eleanor made her way to the kitchen where she found Robert already preparing coffee. "Our son is requesting ceremonial first-day pancakes," she announced, reaching for the flour. Robert's expression softened at the phrase "our son," a simple acknowledgement of the bond they had all fought to protect. Jason's already in the dining room setting the table. Apparently pancakes were assumed. Eleanor laughed. Over the past year, she and Jason had developed an unexpected friendship based on mutual respect and their shared love for Lucas. What could have been an adversarial relationship had instead become a partnership, with each adult bringing different strengths to Lucas's upbringing. Jason entered the kitchen, Lucas perched on his shoulders. "I hear there's a pancake situation developing," he said, lowering his son to the ground. "With chocolate chips," Lucas added hopefully. "With chocolate chips," Eleanor confirmed, reaching for the ingredients. They worked together with the easy familiarity of a family that had discovered its own unique rhythm. Robert manned the coffee machine, Jason mixed batter while entertaining Lucas with science facts about molecular gastronomy, and Eleanor orchestrated the cooking process. As they sat around the table enjoying their breakfast, a knock at the door announced Rosa's arrival for the first day send-off. She entered carrying a small gift, a tradition she had started. "For good luck," she explained, handing Lucas a wrapped package that revealed a handsome fountain pen. "Your mother, my niece, would want you to have this. It belonged to your grandfather, for a boy who is becoming a scholar." Lucas accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity. "Thank you, Abuela. I'll use it for important school things only." The morning proceeded with the organized chaos particular to families with school-aged children. Last-minute homework checks, photograph sessions, and the inevitable search for a misplaced shoe. Through it all, the adults moved in coordinated harmony, each finding their role in the morning ritual. When the time came to leave, they traveled together in the family's SUV rather than the chauffeured town car that had once been the Spencers' signature mode of transportation. Robert had discovered an unexpected enjoyment in driving his family, another small transformation in a man who had once delegated every personal task to staff. At the school gates, Lucas received final hugs and encouragement from all four adults before joining the stream of children entering the building. As they watched him go, Eleanor felt Jason's hand on her shoulder. "He's going to have a great year," he said reassuringly. "I know," Eleanor replied. "It's just always hard to watch him walk away." Robert checked his watch. "I have that board meeting at 9. Jason, didn't you mention needing to prepare for your department meeting?" "I did," Jason confirmed. "First day for teachers, too." Rosa patted Eleanor's arm. "And I promised to help with the Women's Shelter fundraiser materials this morning." Eleanor nodded, the familiar routine settling her emotions. "I'll see you all this evening then. Rosa, will you join us for dinner?" Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Rosa replied with a smile. "I want to hear every detail about his first day." As the others departed, for their respective responsibilities, Eleanor lingered a moment longer, watching the school doors where Lucas had disappeared. 1 year ago, she could never have imagined this life, this complicated, challenging, rewarding life that had developed from a chance encounter in a park. The legal complexity of their arrangement had required ongoing attention. There had been moments of tension, disagreements about parenting approaches, and the occasional awkward social situation where they had to explain their family structure. But through it all, One principle had guided them. Lucas's well-being came. First, that evening, as they gathered around the dinner table listening to Lucas's enthusiastic account of his first day, Eleanor caught Robert's eye across the table. The tension that had once been his constant companion had melted away, replaced by a contentment she had never thought possible for him. Later, after Lucas was in bed and Jason had retired to his wing of the house, Eleanor and Robert stood on the terrace overlooking the Manhattan skyline. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked quietly. "This wasn't exactly the life you planned." Robert considered the question, swirling the scotch in his glass. "I spent my entire life planning, Eleanor. Planning the next acquisition, the next deal, the next triumph." He set his glass down. "And none of those plans ever made me feel the way I felt today watching Lucas walk into that school, terrified and proud all at once." Eleanor leaned against him, his arm automatically encircling her. "That's not really an answer." "No regrets," Robert said firmly. "Not one. This family, as unconventional as it may be, has given me back something I lost long ago." "What's that?" "Hope," he said simply. "Hope and the courage to love without fear." 6 months later, the family gathered in the judge's chambers for a formal proceeding. After extensive legal work and counseling sessions, they had arrived at an unprecedented arrangement, a legal adoption that recognized both the Spencers and Jason Miller as Lucas's parents, with clearly defined rights and responsibilities for all parties. The judge, who had initially been skeptical of such an unorthodox arrangement, had been won over by the reports from social workers and child psychologists, all of whom attested to Lucas's exceptional adjustment and emotional security. "In my 30 years on the bench," the judge remarked, "I've never seen a case quite like this one. But I've also rarely seen a child surrounded by so much love and stability." As the final documents were signed, Lucas looked around at the 4 adults who had reshuffled their entire lives to create a family for him. "Does this mean it's official?" he asked. "That all of you are my family forever?" "That's exactly what it means, buddy," Jason confirmed, ruffling his son's hair. "Although," Robert added with unusual lightness, "I think we've been your family for quite some time now." Eleanor knelt to Lucas's level, taking his hands in hers. "Do you remember that day in the park, when I found you?" Lucas nodded. "I was scared." "I was too," Eleanor admitted. "But do you know what? Sometimes the best families are the ones we find when we're not looking for them." Rosa stepped forward, placing her weathered hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Your mother would be so happy to see you now, mijo. So loved." Lucas looked up at her, his expression serious. "Do you think she can see us? From the stars?" "I know she can," Rosa assured him. "And I know she's smiling." Outside the courthouse, they posed for a photograph that would later take pride of place on the mantel in the Spencer mansion. 4 adults of different backgrounds, ages, and life experiences, united around one small boy with his mother's eyes and a smile that had healed them all. As they celebrated that evening with a small dinner party for close friends, Eleanor watched Lucas move confidently among the guests, secure in the knowledge that he belonged, that he was loved unconditionally by this improbable family that had formed around him. Robert joined her, following her gaze to where Lucas was, enthusiastically explaining his science project to an attentive Jason. "He's going to be fine," Robert said softly. "More than fine." "I know," Eleanor replied. "We all are." Later that night, after the celebration had ended and quiet had settled over the mansion, Eleanor checked on Lucas one last time before bed. She found him fast asleep, surrounded by the photographs that lined his room. Maria smiling from a frame on his nightstand, Rosa teaching him to make tamales in the kitchen, Jason coaching his soccer team, Robert helping with a model airplane, and Eleanor reading him a story. A family created not by conventional bonds, but by choice, by commitment, and by love that had overcome every obstacle. Eleanor gently closed his door, making her way back to Robert, who waited for her in their room. As she prepared for bed, her gaze fell on the IDB family portrait they had taken that day, already framed and placed on her dresser. "Something on your mind?" Robert asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Eleanor smiled. I was just thinking about how far we've all come. How one chance encounter changed everything. Robert nodded. Life rarely follows the plan, does it? No, Eleanor agreed, settling beside him. Sometimes it offers something much better instead. Outside their window, the Manhattan skyline glittered against the night sky, stars visible despite the city lights. Somewhere among them, Eleanor liked to think, Maria was indeed watching over the remarkable family that had formed to love her son. A family bound not by blood or obligation, but by the most powerful choice of all, to love without conditions, to support without judgment, and to create a home where everyone belonged. Good night, she whispered, both to Robert and to the stars beyond their window. In the morning, they would wake to the beautiful chaos of their unconventional family, a family that had found its way home. Fim da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope that Eleanor and Lucas's journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it touched ours. Life's most profound connections often come when we least expect them, and family is sometimes found in the most surprising circumstances. For more emotionally rich stories that explore the complexity of human relationships, we've prepared a special playlist for you. You'll find it by clicking to your left. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. We bring unique narratives like this one every day, each exploring the depth and resilience of the human spirit. What would you have done in Eleanor's situation? We're eager to read your thoughts in the comments section below. Until our next story, remember that family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who choose to remain by your side.